Hello, this is Irina, historian and history teacher, and in this video I would like to point out quite an extraordinary discovery in my favorite realm, that of Norse mythology. If you're listening to me for the first time, check out my other videos as well. They're mostly about Norse myth, Viking Age, and Germanic languages. You might find them interesting. Well, let's discuss about this great discovery. It's not really a new discovery because it dates back to 2020, but people at the Danish National Museum were busy investigating this treasure. So basically, some ancient gold medallions were found by some amateur archaeologists in 2020, and they turn out to be the oldest examples of the god Odin's name in the entire world. Well, at least so far. This happened in a field in Jelling, which is also an important site of power in Viking Age Denmark, linked to the King Gorm the Old, for example, and the more famous Harald Bluetooth. The Vindelev treasure, as the find has been called, contains 800 grams of real gold and is one of the largest gold treasures found here in recent times. Except for 2 Roman gold coins mounted as pendants and 1 bangle with elaborate gold granulation, the hoard was composed mostly of gold bracteates. What are bracteates? They are round medallions made from thin sheets of gold, carved normally with figures from Norse mythology. So these bracteates were usually worn as pendants by the elite, by the ruling class, during the migration period. So that would mean between the 4th and the 6th century, roughly. They were typically small pieces, the size of pennies. However, the ones in our hoard here are much larger. The decoration is also of much higher quality than is typically found on bracteates. This fascinates not only because of the ancient gold, but also because the bracteates, so the gold medallions, have runes on them. These runes are the elder futhark, so the old Germanic alphabet. 2 of them have very long inscriptions where you can identify the name of the supreme god of the Aesir, Odin. They are dated to the 4th century, and through this dating, they are the oldest examples of the god Odin's name. So the oldest inscription so far in which Odin appears was from southern Germany at a large burial ground near Nordendorf. The god's name was scratched on the back of a buckle dating to the second half of the 5th century. And in Denmark, we have Odin on a piece of skull fragment discovered in Ribe, but that only dates back to the 700s. On this particular piece, Odin was invoked as one of the gods who must help the owner of the amulet recover from illness. So the writing here is no longer in the Elder Futhark. We have a transition towards the Viking Age, so towards the younger Futhark. Odin's name was a very well-known runic inscription from all over the Germanic world, because you can also find him under different names. In Old English, for example, Woden, in Old High German, Wotan. So you can find him in stuff like the formula of the 9 herbs. That was a magic charm. Or you can also find him in the origin of the Langobards or the Old Saxon baptismal vow. So not only on objects. Well, excavation showed that in this particular area in Denmark where the treasure was found, so Jelling, there had been a farm consisting of several long houses and fences. And the treasure, therefore, presumably belonged to the local magnate or king, who buried it inside the house or near the house. In the 4th and 5th centuries, rich magnates, so these petty kings, because there were plenty of them, so you don't have to assume they ruled over a large territory. Usually it was a small territory and they ruled over it for a limited amount of time. Anyway, they used gold pendants to show off their status and wealth. This motif was inspired by the Roman imperial medallion, so representing themselves on these bracteates, because we can see a male person usually seen in profile, possibly in the company of a horse, or at any rate, it's a 4-legged animal. There has been an ongoing debate whether the people depicted on these bracteates are gods, so in particular the god Odin, or whether they are kings or princes, so these Scandinavian magnates. The runic inscriptions on the Vindelev bracteates rather indicate the latter. So perhaps bracteates were given away in order as a symbol of an important alliance. Saxo Grammaticus, the historian, writes, for example, about the legendary king Frodi, who had a gold necklace that could be used as a reward. It was a chain composed of different links which alternated images of kings. And such chains with bracteates have been actually found in several places in Denmark. So one of these objects from Vindelev is very special and very valuable for research in this field of study. It has a long runic inscription which is particularly well formed and which makes linguistic sense, or at least a part of it does. It was written from right to left because the model used was left to right. So the inscription runs in a circle around the motif of the bracteate, which shows, like I said before, the face of what is presumed to be a king, seen in profile and with quite a nice hairstyle. In front of the face, we see a swastika and a semicircle. The swastika here most probably has some connection with the sun. It's quite a common symbol on the picture stones as well. And below the face, we have this four-legged animal, probably a horse with a harness and something sticking out of his mouth. His ear points towards the king's open mouth. Although the rooms are well formed and well identifiable quite immediately, there are a lot of problems understanding this text for several reasons. Firstly, this is due to the fact that the bracteate is very worn out, so the runes that we see in important places are almost completely wiped out. Secondly, the inscriptions is written in only one run, which is something old Germanic peoples used to do to the despair of the people deciphering them nowadays, so we don't have markers between the words. There is no pause between them. There are no signs showing where one word ends and the next begins. And another problem is the fact that the language here is not the more documented language of the Vikings. It is a language which is more than 1,500 years old, so before the Viking Age. The first part of the text is particularly difficult because there are words we don't know from other sources, words which don't seem to fit with the development in the history of language. The inscription possibly begins with the word hostios, which can be linked to something like sacrifice. In that case, it might be even a Latin loan word, which would mean that a word such as ostia was borrowed and embedded in the old Germanic language, Proto-Germanic, so a little before Old Norse. In the long sequence that follows, there is probably a declaration where somebody is helping a hunter or with a hunt. We have here a personal name or maybe a nickname, Yagas, which might have something to do with the verb to hunt. What we are certain of, or quite certain of, is the last part of the inscription, because this says is Wodnaz veras, which can be translated as he is Odin's man. Who is this man of Odin? Well, we have this reference to a potential hunter who might have also been the magnate of the area. So again, we know from Saxo Grammaticus that he calls these images of bracteates kings. And we also know that bracteates were used to kind of like imitate Roman emperor depictions. So the safest thing, or I guess until now, it's safe to assume that the depicted persons, or a person in this case, was a king. And the reference to Odin points to his legitimacy. The inscription tells us that the king is the supreme leader of society, and this could have been both in a political and religious way. The long inscription appears to have been copied on one of the other bracteates, but in a more poorly executed reproduction. This other bracteate also shows a king seen from the side with a nice hairstyle above, a horse with the ear pointing towards the king's mouth. In front of the face are the same symbols like on the first bracteate, and in addition we have 3 dots which might symbolize stars. The inscription runs in a circle around the motif again, and some of the characters are clearly runes. Others, however, look like long lines, blurred long lines. So it seems that the guy who made the inscription did not fully understand the text, but was mainly copying the appearance of the characters as best as he could. The meaning of the inscription has been the same as on the first bracteate. There is, however, one detail which cannot be interpreted as a direct copy of the first. The name Odin is actually spelled in a different way, and it also seems that the scribe has swapped 2 runes. So the 2 runes which represent the sounds w and th, or the, are almost identical, which would have made it pretty easy to confuse, especially when they were this small. So these runes are only 2 millimeters high. This means that there once might have existed a third inscription with the same content as of the 2 bracteates. It must have been an important text, probably sacred in some way, if people were that interested in copying it. There was a good reason to have this representation, so we can conclude here. Odin's power related to the power of the king on earth, meant to fulfill some kind of cultic responsibilities as well. We know from later sources, from Norse literature, that Odin was mainly associated with the elite, so he wasn't really the god of the commoners. That was rather Thor, so this context actually makes a lot of sense. So this complete inscription from Vindelev is one of the missing links, in the sense that we now have references to Odin from earlier times. So we have missing links between the Germanic world as described by Tacitus, for example, and the Old Norse mythological poems. So we have 1,000 years here, which need many other sources to fill in the gaps. It's also a key to understanding how illegible bracteate inscriptions originally made sense. So they really had decipherable runes on them. In the same time, it also shows that the images we have on them should rather be interpreted as kings than as Odin himself. But the link is clearly there. I'm looking forward to the article that's going to be published by Lisbeth Immer from the Danish National Museum in collaboration with the linguist Christa Varshus to find out more about this amazing discovery. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please consider subscribing to this little channel on, I hope, interesting stuff.